The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Startup Development Officer Program. So this webinar is designed to give people in the audience an overview on what the SDOs are and how they help develop startups with university researchers for corporate business units. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. But before we begin, I'd like to remind the audience today that we will have Q&A at the end of the session. There is a GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. So if you have questions, you can type in your questions or you can send in your questions throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait till the Q&A portion. All you need to do is type it into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. We would like to give you guys the option of turning on your microphone if you want to read your own question out loud, or if we should just read them for you. So just indicate in your when you type in your question if you want to, for us to turn on your microphone, that you're going to read your question live. I think that would be a good way for us to kind of amp up the interaction between us and the audience. So again, the Q&A will be held at the end, and you can type in your questions throughout the webinar and we'll get to them. And if we have enough time, hopefully we get through as many questions as we can today. So today's speakers, so there's three of us on board. Tony Stanko will be speaking today. He's the executive director of NCET2. He used to be from the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's a securities attorney, and he's been working with startups for, the last 15 years since NCET2 was spun out of George Washington University. Also joining us today is Dr. Glenn Vonk. He is our Director of Business Development and Alliances. He used to be he used to work for BD Technologies, and he also worked extensively with startups by managing and working for BD's Startup Accelerator in Singapore. So our two main speakers today, and I'll be joining them as well. Everyone pretty much knows who I am at this point. I'm Director of Operations of NCET2, and I'll be facilitating the discussion today. So hopefully everyone is comfortable, and we can begin today's session by Glenn introducing what this webinar is about and giving you a better background or an introduction of who we are as an organization. Glenn?
Thanks, Ria. So when I first became acquainted with NCET2, I was in a corporate technology development role. And one of the things that I really liked about working with the organization was that all the stakeholders concerned with commercialization of university technology for commercialization in large corporates were at the table. And what was very interesting was they were really happy with NCET2 as a venue for being able to interact with each other, but they were not very happy with each other. Universities were unhappy in that they were looking for corporates to engage with their technologies, but the corporates weren't really there, and the corporates were sort of discouraged about the commercialization potential of the universities, and there was a lot of fragmentation in the system. And that kind of settled out, I think, at the table as we continued to talk. And as we continued to talk to a group of probably 150 universities and 75 corporates, we identified some issues that were significant in the development and commercialization of university technology, something important really for all the stakeholders that were missing each other in the night, if you want to say that. Some of these issues had to do with management talent, having experienced entrepreneurs that would be able to develop these corporations. Another opportunity for corporates was looking at the $150 billion the government invests in research every year and thinking that there ought to be some things coming out of that that would accelerate their progress towards their business and strategy goals. Startups were looking for gap funding. Universities were trying to prioritize their portfolios. All of these things hinged around really the startups as really a most efficient way for commercializing these technologies. The webinar today addresses many of these shortfalls that we addressed. We'll talk about how NSET 2 is interfacing with the ecosystem as a whole, but particularly today about startup development officers. Startup development officers supply that management talent to the startups in a way which is efficient for them and efficient for the startups. Typically, they are Fortune 500 venture or open innovation executives like myself. They can be serial entrepreneurs of startups, angel investors, or startup attorneys. They advise the startups, typically that are composed in the early stages, primarily of university researchers, and they help them align effectively with the expectations of corporate business units, accelerating them to meaningful exits. In return, they receive equity for review and development activities in startups. So that's our intro. That's what we want to talk about today. And I'll turn it back over to Tony and to Ria to talk in more detail.
All right, thank you, Glenn. So, just to get a little more, into the detail of what NSET 2 is, especially for people in the audience who have not engaged with us before, or maybe those who know us from before, I'd just like to clarify in this webinar that the SDOs are part of a bigger mission of NSET 2. So we're essentially an organization of Fortune 500 corporations where we help them discover, develop, and fund startups, essentially from universities, angel groups, and state groups through a program that we call the Corporate Startup Development Program, which was specifically designed to align startups to corporate business units. So our mission answers the call or the gaps that Glenn specified earlier during the introduction. So just a deeper dive on what the Corporate Startup Development Program is. So it's essentially three components. So we do discovery, we do development, and we also funnel companies that go through the development piece into funding through our angel group called the National Angels and an investment banker fund that we've set up for these startups. The discovery process is actually the first stage of the program, where by us working side by side with our corporate members, we solicit from them their corporate needs, basically wish lists to describe what their business needs are or what their technology needs are. Through these corporate needs, we receive startups from universities and basically any other group that works with startups to show these corporates what the universities or what the federal labs or what angel portfolios have, and basically find out which startups they're interested in. And the way that we do this is through virtual startup pitches that we do twice a month. We present these startups that were submitted to us via the wish list of our corporates, and we present it to the corporations and the startup development officers to discover these startups that are interesting or have market relevance, if that's a better way to describe it. The development part comes after the discovery. So once our corporates find a company or companies that they're interested in, and they find that they're too early for them to mobilize resources or to develop the startup internally, they actually kick the companies back to us. And through the development process, we employ the help of our startup development officers to move these companies forward, essentially de-risk the technology. The SDOs assist in developing the startups with milestones that the corporates that we work with provide to guide the startup development. So the development piece is actually the meat of our discussion today, because this is where the SDOs have a bigger role in moving the startups forward. As I mentioned earlier, the funding piece is where we funnel the companies that we develop to help them with their seed funding. If it's early stage funding, we have that angel group. But if it's a company that's a little further along, that we've developed further along, then we have the investment banker fund to fill that gap in funding that Glenn mentioned earlier. So as I said, just to wrap up this slide, the SDOs play a really big role when it comes to this program, the Corporate Startup Development Program, because this is where they come in as advisors to move the companies forward. So, with that as a background, we'd like to get into what the SDOs are about, like who they are and what they're expected to do or what they can contribute when it comes to the startup development piece. So I'd like to turn it over to Tony, who could give us a better overview of who the SDOs are and what is it they do. Tony, you there?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Ria, Glenn. So, Tony Stanko, I'm the Executive Director of NSET2. So who are the SDOs, or the Startup Development Officers in our program? So these are people that are sophisticated and have extensive knowledge and experience in helping startups, to get to an exit of some sort. So the categories are the four listed here. So for us, as Ria mentioned, a lot of what we do is to have research at universities and federal labs commercialized for corporates, for their business units. So a major category are people like Glenn, who worked at Fortune 500 companies. So if you're one of those, you're welcome to work with us, apply and be part of this. The next group is serial entrepreneurs. So startups, obviously need a lot of help in succeeding. The risks are against them to begin with, and a lot of the startups we work with from universities have research teams, science teams, and they don't have a lot of entrepreneurial experience. So they definitely need help when they come up against problems that they just don't know how to solve. So our SDOs that are serial entrepreneurs can help them with those issues as they come up. The third category is angel investors. So our startups have to be venture backable. They have to bring in outside money to really do what they're trying to do, as most startups do. I mean, we're not looking for lifestyle companies or companies that are at high growth. So there's a lot of money that's usually involved to kind of get them moving pretty quickly. And so they have to be venture backable, and that's where the angel investors can really help. Angel investors can be investors through the national angels, as Ria mentioned, but if they want to help and be on the board, an advisory board, then they can get equity instead of investing, but with the advisement work. The last category is a new category. We found out the hard way, in a sense, that a lot of these companies just don't get formed correctly, and so there's a lot of work to clean them up once we bring them into the program. So we're looking for startup attorneys that are interested in being SDOs to help them get on the right path. And so, things like that we've seen already is, just coming in as an LLC instead of a C corp. I mean, that it's just not a good way to start, because it has to be converted and it could create problems later. So that's one. The corporates don't want an LLC, but the investors definitely don't, right? So anyway, the other problem usually is the stock option plans. They don't have them, or they're not properly formed or executed, and so that causes problems, along with not having the proper agreements in place. So the stock options are actually the currency for startups, right? So that usually they don't have money, and they use stock options to bring in the people and do what else they need to do. So it's really important, if they're going to build up the teams properly, that they have those in place. So the SDOs, that's what they do in those categories. They help the startup founders, get these startups up and running. So let's go on to the next slide, and I'll get into a little bit more. Ria? Okay, so there's basically two parts right now for the SDOs. It's almost like a junior and a senior level. So the first thing startup development officers come in and do is get on the virtual pitches, and they help identify the startups that they think could be useful for development or can make it through the development program. We also have the corporates look at the startup, so there has to be a corporate that's interested, to give us milestones to move it forward to a business unit. But that's one vetting. But we also want to make sure these startups are going to be venture backable and are going to make it. And the corporates kind of rely on us, and we rely on the SDOs to help identify the ones that can actually get through the program. That Rio will talk a little bit about that later on, but it's kind of scoring them in 5-10 minute pitches just to see what people think of those companies. And then we also use those introductions and recommendations for the SDO. So if they come into if the startups come into the program, we use the indications of which SDOs want to spend time with the company, and we ask for quite a bit of time because this is not a voluntary thing. There's compensation in the way of the equity. So the equity is long term, and so we expect the SDOs to kind of stick with the company and expect the compensation as the startup succeeds. So we need to know which SDOs want to spend that time or interested in that area. So on these virtual showcases, you identify also if you're interested in working with the company long term, and then we use those if we bring them into the program, the startups, to set up the interviews with the SDOs to see which ones would be interesting to the startup to work with. If it's in the program and we have corporate interest, the major part is actually this advisory development part. This is the long-term part. So, it's a 10, 15-minute identification on the virtual showcases. Then we do some work, and then if we bring them into the program, there's lining up to milestones. There's, really doing a development plan for them, figuring out where their problems are in the way of management, in the way of IP strategy, in the way of, goals sometimes, and working with them to have a development plan, multi-year development plan with multiple milestones. And after that, once that's agreed to by the SDOs, by the startups and the corporates, then it's kind of sitting on the boards and making sure that they either stay on track or reporting out that they fell off track. Startup the counsel service. I mean, again, that's pretty unique to if you're a startup attorney, but that's just kind of making sure, especially at the beginning, that these the documents are properly formed and the records are proper for due diligence purposes later. And then, maybe just being like a internal counsel to say, okay, this is where you might need to get outside counsel or whatever, just to make sure there's a proper tracking on the legal side to make sure, problems don't creep up and blow up the company later on. Time commitment is really up to you. It can be as little as 5 hours a month if you have just one advisory development startup. Basically, that's we estimate it would be about 3 to 5 hours per month per startup, and a lot of these are going to be part-time people that we have. All right, next slide. Here's a little bit more in specifics. I think I touched on a lot of this already. So IP strategy guidance, science team, development, management team. We break those up because the corporates generally want the science team. The management team isn't as interesting to the corporates because they do the scale up, and generally they already have people that could take the company from a few $1 million to hundreds of millions or whatever it could be. So the model for us is really just to do the innovation in the startup And that's usually the science team developing the research at the universities or federal labs into some kind of commercial product that the corporates could take into their business units and sell around the world with their existing manufacturer, distribution, and sales networks. The milestones, talked a little bit about that. We get those from the corporates. Product development, sales projections, that's all part of the milestones. Gross margins is a big thing for the corporates. I mean, the whole goal here is to have significant material sales and revenue growth, so they can show the stock market that they're growing. So that's really the arbitrage we're doing here. They can take those sales increases and monetize them in the stock market at PE ratios are like 20-30% these days, whereas nobody else can really do that. But what they need is the innovation, and so that's what we do. We have these startups create the innovation, prove it out, de-risk it, and bring it to the corporates, and then they scale it, and we kind of sell the company at whatever we could get for them, and we kind of work that out at the beginning. That obviously depends on the gross margins and global potential market that the product could reach. Again, the legal services it's all just to make sure things don't blow up or get very expensive, either to clean it up or when we bring in investors, it's not going to either scare them away because they can't do the due diligence properly, or it has to all be cleaned up. All right, next slide. Right. Yeah. So I mentioned it's an equity play. So you're advisors and you get advisor equity. You get it from two sources. So we have a development company that pools all the portfolio companies for the year, and so you get shares from the pool, and also you get shares from the startup. So if you're sitting on the board, you get advisory shares. The big chunks are from the startup directly, but then to de-risk it, just in case the startup you're working on isn't the one that succeeds, there's a lot of risk here, as I'm sure you know. You'll still get something from the portfolio that the SDO share. The shares, are allocated according to these three things. Basically, and we touched on them before. So setting and scoring the virtual showcases. I think there's like 5 to 10% for that, and introductions. So we have angels sometimes and some other SDOs that have found startups or have come across startups, and they send them to us. So we, since that's part of the the activity, the portfolio, we give some shares for that out of the pool, and then obviously the big part, the majority is the advisory services to the startups individually. All right, next. And I think this is yours, Ria.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Okay, so with that overview, how do you start participating as an SDO? So the first level, as Tony mentioned, when it comes to identifying startups, what we do with the SDOs is the first thing they do with us is they go to the virtual startup pitches. So they listen to the startups present. And what that usually looks like is, 5-minute presentations, usually 5 to 7 startups per session. And the SDOs fill out the scorecard as well as indicate whether or not they're interested in working with the company going forward, should the company be accepted into the development program. Essentially, when this happens, when the company gets accepted into the development platform, we contact the SDOs that have indicated interest, and depending on what the startups need in terms of work, they interview the interested SDOs, and they pick 1 or 2 from the batch that that would fit what they are trying to hit in terms of milestones. So we've been doing these virtuals with our SDOs since 2018. So the next set actually starts mid this year around on June 5th, and hopefully people on the call, if you're interested in becoming an SDO, this is pretty much the first step on how to engage. To those who are interested in formally sending over their information, we do have a link that we'll send to you. We'll put that in the chat box also, where you can send in your CV, put in a short bio so we know a little bit more about who you are, your experience. Then going forward, SDOs that fit any of the categories that we mentioned earlier, as well as have that general experience of working with startups. We'll contact them via email, schedule a phone call, and provide you more information on how to get on the virtuals. So basically, this is what the SDO program is about. And what we've experienced before with our SDOs, a lot of them are very much into the startup ecosystem. As Tony mentioned, not only do the SDOs are not only in the receiving end of looking at startups that come out of our pipeline, but they're also active in recommending companies that they already work with to see whether or not there would be interest on the corporate side, especially if you're an angel investor or you're looking to exit your company to a corporate. Like, the platform that we have is one of the ways that our SDOs utilize in order to see if there's potential for a corporate exit there. So I think this is our last slide. We're preparing some slides with questions that are coming in. Glenn, Tony, do you have anything else to add while we prep some questions that have come in from the audience?
No, I think we can go to Q&A unless Glenn wants to add something. We have some good questions here, so I think we'll be able to elaborate from the questions.
Okay, let me put in the first one. There's a lot coming in, so please give me a few seconds to just to sort this out. Hang on, I think I have. Whoops. There you go. Okay, let me do the first question here. I think this is pretty much on point. Let's see. I think Dan wants to turn on his microphone. Let me see. Dan, can you hear us?
Thank you, Ria.
Okay, so I'll pull up one of your questions here on the screen, so you could ask it. There you go.
Yes. So Tony and Glenn, when the process, which I think you have outlined brilliantly, and I think because it involves an investment banking relationship at some very important point, that there needs to be a private placement memorandum, brought together. So who sort of, I would imagine the inventor scientists, the tech transfer people, everyone's got a hand in this thing. But is it something now that you're looking for the startup attorney SDO types to do it for free or for equity?
So the company, this is a great question, by the way. So the company is the lead, right? It's their company. So we're just advisors. And, we sit on the advisory board to kind of line things up for them properly. So, if they need an investment banker to put something together, they have to, with our advice and consultation, hire them, right? So an investment banker is usually a very end anyway. Earlier on, for some angel money, let's say, that's where private placement memorandum, that has to be done by an attorney, right? Again, the startup attorney that is the advisor on the inside with, with us, that's just to kind of line it up to make sure, it's done properly and they know what kind of issues to handle. It's more like a general counsel, operation in a large firm where the inside counsel kind of helps to direct where it goes, keep the prices down, and make sure there's expertise on the inside, so that the right people on the outside are doing the right job. But it still has to be the startups baby. They have to come up with whatever they need to come up with, right? The teams, the full management team, the full set of outside counsel and outside support.
Well, okay, thank you. That's brilliant. So I'm thinking out loud that this comes from a mandate or request from one of the corporate 500 members. So I'm thinking out loud, and just steer me straight here. Are they the folks that can help supply a lot of this research with the margins, all the general market size, product details, and how to make that product perfect, and the cost involved and all that sort of thing? They might actually know a lot of this stuff. They just want to see an improvement, and it's a ton of work, as you know. I've written these PPMs along with the entrepreneurs, so that then when we take it to their corporate securities expert, it's more of a polishing job that costs a few $1,000s, and not a from the ground up creation of a few tens of thousands of dollars. And I just was wondering, is it typically, in your experience, do you see some corporate executives want to jump aboard? They actually know this stuff. They know the space. They're looking to exploit some IP within the company, and that they can jump out with a lot of knowledge and turnkey this thing on, in a manner of speaking. I mean, what's the genesis?
Yeah, so the corporates generally, you're right, have a total huge amount of expertise on the inside that they can bring to bear, right? So that is part of setting up the margins and all of that. It's really an iterative process where the startup has to come up with something, right, with some kind of idea. The SDOs then use their expertise to bring that up to a higher level. Then we take it to the corporates that are interested, right? So the corporates kind of give preliminary interest, that they're interested in what this company's doing, and then it's kind of like narrowing it down to specifics. So we take, what that plan is to them and say, okay, this is what we're thinking, right? Does this make sense? And they tell us yes or no, and if it's a no, but still could be tweaked, then we take those tweaks back to the startup and say, okay, this is what the corporates are saying you need to do. All right. If it's too far, again, the companies, the startups, the entrepreneur's company, right? So you got to have that passion. So there's only so much that you can, guide them. If it's not an area that they're interested in, you don't want to take them out of where they want to go, because they'll give up after, right? Because they have to deliver the company, and there's always, a lot of risk to move these things forward. So yes, you'll have changes, and the people that are driving it, the entrepreneurs, that management team, need to really still believe in the company. So the corporates give guidance, the SDO also give guidance, but at the end of the day, you have to have the passion from the entrepreneurs. But the corporates give us a lot of feedback. And that's really what we, rely on. It's to say, yeah, if we deliver this company to you in 3 to 4 years, and it looks like X, Y, and Z, because that's what we have the startup do, is kind of envision what does the company look like in the way of, what's the IP that's going to go along? What does the product look like? What are the margins that you're anticipating? What are the sales, right, that you need to kind of show? What are the scientists going along? Which scientists are going along, right? Making sure that those documents allow for the scientists to go along the employment agreements. To make sure the management team, goes along if it wants to go along. A lot of times they don't, or the corporates don't want them, so you need to make sure those agreements are in place. And so we just kind of go back and forth until we have this vision of what this company is going to look like. An analogy we use is like, doing a building, right? So that we have the architect plans, and we kind of, talk to the corporate. This is what it's going to look like, right? And if they say, yeah, you like it, they like it, then, we have something to build. And then we take that and go to the investors, right? The National Angel of the Investment Banker Fund, say, okay, this is what the deal looks like, right? They're telling us, you know, if we deliver what this looks like, they're going to be there for a particular price. Because we also negotiate price up front. You know, these are early exits. You know, so, you know, we're happy with $50 million exits if we only put $5 million in. It can even be less, right? It can be $30 million exit as long as we put only $3 million in for this 3 to 5 year exit. Or if it needs 25 million, then it has to exit for 250 million. So for us, it just needs, you know, what the work needs to happen and what the exit is totally related. And also, you know, it has to fall in with what the investors are going to, you know, pony up. All right.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You got more? Or Dan, did you have a follow-up? I think you had two, right? One or two
Tony, I
questions.
think I could talk with you and Glenn all day, but I'm fascinated with Glenn. Parachuted in here to be on the team from what I thought was a fairly lofty place in Beck and Dickinson's corporate arm, and they're a bunch of really neat folks at BD. So Glenn, you must have quite a story in your background, and I'm just wondering, how did you first become entrepreneurial, and what were you doing back in high school and college that led you here?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, what happened when I first joined BD, and this would have been back in the late 80s, we were doing substantially all of our R&D was internal. And BD was like about a $2.5 billion company, maybe at that point. So it was, you know, a lot of internal development, a lot of internal research. Fast forward to maybe, you know, 5 years ago when it was getting to the end of my time at BD, and there was no internal program in corporate that did not have a significant external component, either collaboration or working with a startup of some kind. And it's just a reality of life now that we want to be efficient with our R&D dollars. We want to move more quickly. We don't have the overheads and all the communication requirements, regulatory requirements. We work with startups, so that's a very, very efficient way to work. So there was, you know, a transition over time, and I think that transition is continuing also. Corporate internal research is guiding. It can be transformative, and it's what you want to have for your core, but there's a whole lot of stuff that you want to leverage outside. The only thing I would add to what Tony said is that sometimes it's good to know who you're talking to in the corporate group. Most of who we talk to are the line businesses. The line businesses have high expectations for revenues, so they're looking for something that's going to be accretive pretty quickly. Occasionally, you do run into somebody more in the technology development organization where they're looking for leverage or differentiation. And if you do run into somebody like that, then they're often willing to participate at an earlier stage. It might be in consulting, it might be with a little bit of funding. And as you know, the relationships that develop over time often lead to substantial investments.
Well, what kind of kid, Glenn? What kind of kid were you? Were you one of those newspaper kids, or did everyone's raking the leaves and shoveling the snow? I mean, how did you put yourself into this mix?
Well, I almost was a musician, so I always had a strong creative aspect to my character, and always wanted to do new stuff. I did have an opportunity to go run businesses, and I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to do the new stuff, and I like hard problems. So it's just a matter of temperament, I think. And I enjoyed working with startups. I enjoy seeing them succeed.
All right. Okay, thanks, Dan. Let's move on to the next question. I think the next person with a question is Julie. Julie, I'll turn on your microphone now so you could ask your question, and it's on the screen.
Okay, great. Hi, my name's Julie Meltzer. I looked at your categories of people that you're interested in, and I'm wondering if you're interested in people who are sort of a hybrid of some of the categories. You know, I've done some tech transfer with universities, mostly in highly regulated industries, and created startups and assisted dozens of startups, but I don't really fit clearly into any of the categories. Are you pretty strict about your categories?
Well, a lot of people actually fit more than one a lot of times, so that's not an issue. Really, it's got to come from the startup side. I mean, it's advisors to the startup. So as long as you add something, to the startup, then it'll work fine.
Okay, great. That's all I needed to know. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, we have another question here, and I think this is from, hang on, I'm having problems with my computer. There you go. I think this is from Deborah. Deborah, let me turn on your microphone now. Let me see. There you go.
Great. Thank you, Tony, Glenn, and Rhea. Deb Mansfeld out of Houston, Texas. Have come from university and worked with tech transfer, and so I know that side of the house, trying to, move innovation out of universities. But for the last 16 years, I've been working with startups in high tech. And so my question is, your customer here, is your main focus as a customer your Fortune 500? I know that you are working with tech transfer organizations that want to see their technology move out of the university so that it does reach a commercial market. But is your focus more on the strategic, so that there's more of a stronger pull that the technology will be commercialized? So thank you.
Sure. So I'm not sure this is the question on. Is this Rhea? Is this her question?
Yes,
I thought
it
it was
is.
the one earlier, but
no, this
oh,
is.
it is.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I got confused. Sorry.
Yeah, because
Okay.
I guess part of my question was, is it to get to the Fortune 500 as a university just to license, or is it to actually have an R&D arm that's a small business that can actually do license agreements and contracting to that strategic customer? So thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the Fortune 500 basically want to see the technology out of the university, the federal labs developed further. It's too early for them. As Glenn was kind of saying, that mostly what they're interested in, to be really interested, is something that's actionable in a business unit, because that adds revenues or saves costs. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so it's less likely that they're interested in the technology, though sometimes they are, because if they are, that means they have to put the money in and they have to find the people to develop it. But for what we do with the startups, the startup is the vehicle to develop that technology. So you have people, researchers that are passionate about moving this technology to market. So that solves the people problem, especially if they've been working on it and they can put a few more people together. And also the venture people venture investors can fund it. And so they just get to see a lot more, because there's so much research out there, and their appetite is actually restricted to what really can add revenues or save expenses. So if you deliver there to that business unit, that's endless, right? Because they'll just keep taking that in. But
sure. So I guess
if you don't do that, then it's more limited. Go ahead.
Sure. So what I've witnessed with especially high tech coming out of universities is that eventually it's going to be a merger acquisition for that company as an exit, or having a sale of a business unit. So if you're working with Fortune 500s that have gaps in their R&D, this could be an interesting relationship, an early look-see, a supporting organization with NCET2, and then potentially, anywhere from 5 to 10 years down the line, it could be something that they may merge, acquire, in, or purchase. So it's kind of a pull model that I think is very attractive. So I applaud you guys for, going beyond the hedges with these universities.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you have it dead on, right? Because what we do with the corporates is show them a development plan. We actually, are expecting them to buy the company at the end, right? So that's the whole point. It's kind of showing them the plans and saying, all right, so if we deliver this, what are you going to pay? Right? Are you going to be interested? And what are you going to pay? We throw out a number because they just try to. They're not going to commit to something 3-5 years down the line or more. but we just want to know, we're thinking it's going to be, $50 million company. What do you think? Or it's going to be
Very
a $100 million company. What do you think, right? Because we need an exit. If you don't have an exit,
Yep.
you don't have anything, right? You just have, you have a money hole, right? You just have money going in and you don't have money coming out. So you have to have the exit.
Very good.
So for
Well,
us, the
thank
Fortune
you.
500, yeah. Okay, sure, pleasure. Oh, it looks like we're running out of time. So Ria, how many more can we do? And maybe we'll keep the answers shorter.
Yeah, we can do a couple more. And for the questions that we don't get to, we'll have the webinar recording available, and we'll see, if we can get to the questions post webinar, because there are a lot of interesting questions. It's just a matter of time at this point. This next question is actually interesting. That's why, I think we need to put it on. This is like a question that's typically asked, not just by SDOs, but by startups too. What is the typical exit time frame? Does the SDO go with the team to the corporate and stay involved?
So the time frame we try for is 3 to 5 years. Obviously that flips, but that's what we try for. Because keep in mind what we're trying to do. We're not trying to scale up the company, right? The scale up is usually where you spend a lot of time and there's a lot of risk and you need a lot of money. So we're leaving that to the corporates because they need that. They have, the manufacturing, distribution, sales networks in place. They just need the product to put in there. So what we're trying to do is just take that innovation from the lab or from an angel or somebody else. It has to be IP strong, research strong company, by the way. They're not looking for app type companies, but if that's the case, it's just developing that into a product. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be a product. For example, in life science companies, the market really for corporates is like phase 2 clinicals. That's where they kind of come in, right? So they don't. There's exceptions, but they usually don't come in before that. So you kind of need to come up with that money. And if you get out of phase 2, they're all over you, because they'll take it from there. For other things, for manufacturing or chemical companies, it can be $25, $50 million exits in 3 to 5 years. They just need to know that, the science works, that it's scalable. Even if they're going to do the scaling, they need to have some evidence of that. They usually need to have some evidence of some sales. So unlike the life science side, where you can't get sales until you come out of the regulatory compliance part, a lot of these other things, you could do local sales or regional sales to show them, yeah, customers are paid, the price points are right, the features are right, and then they could, analyze that and figure out, worldwide what it means, to that kind of customer. So that's the time frame, and that's, the plan. With the SDOs don't go with the corporate. The SDOs don't really even go with the team, because these are really advisory roles. So the team that usually goes to the corporate, if the corporate wants them, right, the customer wants them, is the science team. So the people that created the IP is usually who they want. The management team, again, depends on the corporate, but probably not. So it's more of the science team, and if it's a really great salesperson, maybe, but they have salespeople. What they're looking for are people that can create, new product in big ways. And the management team, it's usually the scale-up part, and we're not really, these startups aren't demonstrating the scale-up part, they're just demonstrating the innovation part. So, the management team could go either way, and probably not. All right, next.
Okay, I think this is the last question, for this batch. And again, we'll get the recording available to those attending today, and we'll see if we can get to the questions offline for those that are asking really specific questions, especially about the SDO program. So this is from the same person, Terry Hellman. Is the transition to corporate based on an industry multiplier, or, sorry, I couldn't read the rest, or is it a stock transfer or cash?
So what we want is an exit, right, for the investors. I mean, it could be, cash is always good, right? And, stock is fine if it's freely tradable. You know, like as long as it's public stock, you can cash that out. So that's a cash equivalent. So yeah, an exit has to be, you know, where people get paid out. The transition based on so that's a great question. That's a really sophisticated question. So yes, you know, the multiplier, so the price earnings ratio for the stock, you know, traded company, if it's 30, 50 times, you know, a dollar, to make it simple, you know, like $1 of earnings would be like $50 stock price, right? So if you give them $1 million of earnings, they get $50 million stock price increase. You give them $1 billion of earnings, then they get a $50 billion. So that's what they want. The startup could never get that, right? I mean, there's just no way to get that kind of multiplier. But you know, that's the market, right? That's the arbitrage. So a corporate that could get 50 times the earnings is going to be pretty well, especially, you know, for these kind of companies that aren't going to go public themselves. It's the best way to exit. That's why, you know, the investors kind of exit to the corporates, because they put in money to you know, get some earnings or get some sales, and then the corporate could capitalize that better than the startup, unless they go public themselves, which is, you know, if it happens, it's great, but you don't count on that. You know, nobody. Even I'm writing a chapter for a book for somebody, and I was looking at even Y Combinator. You know, I think they said they had I have that number in front of me now. I can't remember it, but it was thousands of startups that they invested in, and you know, how many of them actually became public companies, right? It's on hand. It all fits in a hand or two. I don't think, you know, it's like 5 out of, you know, a couple of thousand. So public companies, even in the best programs, are pretty unique uh, and unusual. So it's always a corporate exit, and that's the game. You can't put more money in than you're going to get out. And the people that are going to pay you out have their own, you know, multiplier that they have to, you know, capture most of that. But there's a lot to capture. All right, so if that's the last one, thank you, everyone. Rhea, back to you.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap it up because we're running out of time. But, you know, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And, you know, we hope that through this webinar, you get a little more information about what we do when we help the startups, as well as helping the corporates find new innovation. And hopefully, you know, after this webinar, some of you would consider joining our program as an SDO. These links that I have on the screen will be sent to you via email later this week. We'll also make the video available. If you know of anyone, colleagues that would be interested in knowing more about the SDO program, just drop us an email. We'd be happy to provide the information that they need. And also, I'd like to thank Tony and Glenn for joining us and, you know, being part of this webinar as well. So hopefully, you know, this was a really fruitful discussion. Thank you for all the questions. That was a really good interaction. And we are looking forward to hearing from you. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop us an email. Please expect the post-webinar email in a couple of days. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks, Rhea. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Bye-bye.